I think this is a pretty tricky transition question. So what I'm going to do to start is just remind myself that these complicated looking words are actually simpler words in disguise. In addition is basically and, in contrast is basically but, specifically is kind of a different way of just saying for example, at least that's what we would probably use in our own conversation, and therefore is a slightly more complicated way of saying so, a cause and effect word. Now, when I go to this, I'm going to try to see how these sentences are connected, and maybe I'll just, instead of using the more complicated words that they gave me as choices, I'll use the simple transition category words instead, so maybe I can just hear what that relationship is. So let's start at the beginning, though. In 2009, the Craft and Folk Art Museum in Los Angeles hosted a special exhibition, Sueños Yume, showcasing the works of local sculptor Dora de Larios. As suggested by the show's title, Sueños and Yume mean dreams in Spanish and Japanese, respectively. De Larios' art reflects a mix of cultural influences. Her work is grounded in the artistic traditions of both Mexico and Japan. Well, Japan and Mexico are kind of represented many times throughout this. So here's what I think we would first of all want to do is get rid of be, right? It's not a but. So it's if we shorten this sentence a little bit, De Larios' art reflects a mix of cultural influences, but her work is grounded in the artistic traditions of both Mexico and Japan. It's not a but, right? That's reinforcing that same idea because it's saying it's a mix, and then the second sentence is saying that it's a mixture of Japan and Mexico. So it's not a contrast. Those two ideas match up. Now that might mean that we want to go with something like in addition, because they're like, okay, in addition is a word we would use to kind of continue a thought. However, in addition is a pretty weak transition. It basically doesn't transition at all. It's just like saying, okay, here's a new thing I'm about to talk about. So it might fit here, but most of the time that we pick words like in addition or and words in our answer choices here, it's going to be because nothing else works. So I might pick A, but it's always through process of elimination. If I don't think that C and D are right, then I might have no choice, and then A is kind of what's left over. Because C and D both are transition words that have a little bit more meaning behind them. So we can see if that meaning works. Let's go to the more maybe familiar, the word so here. De Larios' art reflects a mix of cultural influences, so her work is grounded in the artistic traditions of both Mexico and Japan. To me, that's actually backwards. I would prefer to say her work is grounded in the artistic traditions of both Mexico and Japan. So De Larios' work, art reflects a mix of cultural influences. It seems like it's backwards. And that's because the fact that her work reflects multiple cultures is not causing it to be grounded in the artistic traditions of Mexico and Japan. It is grounded in those traditions, and so the way we might talk about that is as a mixture of different cultures. So these two sentences are backwards for us to use D. However, I think this is still a trap answer because there is a little bit of a cause and effect. It's just flipped. And so this is maybe the benefit of being able to take the word therefore, condense it into the more familiar word so, and then literally plug that into the blank. We might be able to hear that like, okay, this logic is a little bit backwards. Now let's try the same thing with C. For example is not necessarily shorter, but it's maybe a little bit easier for us to wrap our brains around. So let's try that. De Larios' art reflects a mix of cultural influences. For example, her work is grounded in the artistic traditions of both Mexico and Japan. That sounds right, like the right logic to me, right? So we have this kind of big picture idea. Her work is a mixture of cultural influences. Then specifically, we're going to talk about how it's a mixture of Mexican and Japanese culture. So we're going from the big picture idea to this smaller example. So a for example word is going to be right. Now, I don't think that A, in addition, is really awful in that spot. This is how these questions work, is we're really not going to pick words like in addition, furthermore, moreover, unless we just have nothing else that works. Those are almost always last resort answers because they don't really transition at all. So this is why with these transition questions, we definitely need to know what the transition words mean. We also need to understand how the game of these questions is played. There's certain rules that we need to follow, and process of elimination comes up quite a bit in these questions. And so don't just try to listen for the best thing all the time. Sometimes the right answer will be much more about understanding how the SAT is building the question and the kind of ordering, the precedence that we have to give to certain answer choices. And basically things like and words are going to be kind of our last resort. So hopefully this all explained it. Maybe for you, choice C just was much more obvious, but I do think it's important to note how the game and the rules of these questions work because I definitely use them in order to get some of the hardest ones right, like this one.